Ukraine is one of the biggest exporters of corn. What will the consequences of that be for the food supply chain around the world, do you think?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to join you, and thank you for having me on. And indeed, this, as you rightly referenced, adds on to the pandemic as one of the disruptions, whether it's unforeseen or otherwise, to global supply chains for critical goods, commodities, and in the case of your question, agriculture right now. And Russia and Ukraine both have been growing food producers and food exporters. In fact, Russia in 2021 was the world's largest exporter of wheat, for example. China imports a lot of barley, for example, from Ukraine. We've just received word that a number of the Trans-Siberian railways that are operating the freight corridors and shipping various agricultural goods and commodities across Eurasia, effectively from Europe all the way to China, are going to have their operations suspended. So that's going to impact, of course, on Ukrainian food exports all the way to the east. So, for those specific commodities where Ukraine is a central player, obviously there's going to be additional disruption. And the same thing applies for Russian exports as well because of sanctions. So every country, again, whether it's the pandemic disruption that was unforeseen or whether it is this invasion, now has to constantly rethink, recalibrate, remap, resource, procure alternative geographies of from which to import basic goods. And I think this is just part and parcel of the complexity of globalization today, that we have sort of one crisis after another that forces us to rethink how resilient our global supply chain networks are.
And how long do you think it will be before the impact of that is felt in supermarkets here in the UK and elsewhere, I suppose? Are we talking within the next few days, or is the knock-on effect generally a little bit more time lag than that?
Certainly a little bit longer than that. It really depends, of course, on the stockpiles of grain or other, commodities and foodstuffs that countries have. Again, the alternative supply or suppliers that they have contracts with. It depends on prices and forward spot markets. There are a lot of variables here. So, it really depends on which country you're in and your connectivity, if you will, or dependence on Ukraine and Russia at this point in time. And then obviously competition over the new suppliers who wind up being the alternative providers of certain goods. So all of those variables have to be taken into account. And that's precisely what the grocers are doing. That's what the importers and import exporters and of course the various companies that are the commodities traders are doing right now in terms of trying to figure out how they can continue to meet their international obligations.